Welcome to part 3 of Adventures with Alexander, where we follow the events of his life and why he was so very great. In the last episode, we looked at Alexander's early life and his military experiences as a teenager, serving under his father, Philip II. And Philip II was a very experienced and very strategic military leader. But in 336 BC, Philip is suddenly assassinated by a former lover, and Alexander becomes the king at the age of 20. So he is now the ruler, the Basileus of Macedonia. Now, a few years before his death, Philip had married Cleopatra Eurydice, who was a Macedonian woman, and it was seen as being a match between two Macedonians, whereas all of Philip's other wives had been political marriages from other areas. Philip and Cleopatra Eurydice had two children. Some of the records only mention one, the daughter Europa. Some mention two, Europa and a little boy called Caranus. Alexander's mother, Olympias, steps in. Her son, Alexander, has been proclaimed as king. However, he is only half Macedonian, whereas Cleopatra's children, they are babies, they're toddlers, they're very young, but they are fully Macedonian. And there are stories that Olympias had the children murdered, and then Cleopatra Eurydice commits suicide, or that she was murdered as well, or that Olympias had all three of them burned alive. Whichever story actually happened, the result is that Cleopatra Eurydice and her children have been removed as threats to Alexander on the throne of Macedonia. Now, Alexander's response to this is he was very angry, that his mother had done something like this. However, he may have been angry, he may have just been putting it on to remove himself from Olympias's acts because she had done something pretty horrible. And even if he agreed with the result that these threats to his throne had been removed, he had to make a public appearance that he was horrified at this. Whichever was, he did remove any other threats that he saw to the throne. So, back in our very first episode, when we looked at how Philip II became King of Macedonia, he was actually a long way down the line of succession. His older brother was the king. And when his older brother was killed, his young nephew, Amyntas IV, was supposed to become the king, and Philip was going to be his regent. But instead of that, he took over the throne. Now, Philip treated Amyntas IV fairly well, aside from, stealing the throne from him. He marries him off to his eldest daughter from one of his other wives, Sinaine. However, Alexander has Amyntas killed. He sees him as a threat and removes him. He also acts against Attalus. Attalus was the uncle of Philip's wife, Cleopatra Eurydice, the Macedonian love match. Attalus was experienced, he's a general, he is Macedonian. Attalus and Alexander have a very bad history because they had fought at Philip and Cleopatra Eurydice's wedding. And upon Philip's death, Attalus panics. He's like, I am in a bad position now. So he writes to Athens and says, can I come to you? I will fight against Alexander. I will bring you my experience and my information about Alexander. But before he can leave and get to Athens, Alexander has him murdered as well. So, with a 20-year-old king on the throne of Macedonia, a lot of those surrounding areas took that chance to revolt up against him. When his father, Philip II, was alive, he had got all of those surrounding areas and got them to join into a league. However, with Philip gone, all of those states basically tried to revolt up against him. Alexander had to step in. He gets his soldiers, his cavalry who are on horseback, and he sets off to deal with this problem. Now, Alexander was not only inheriting the throne, he also was inheriting Philip's military force, and Philip had made a couple of very good innovations to it. He had lengthened their spears, and one of the strategies they used was something called a phalanx, where we have a block of soldiers together. They have these very long spears called the sarissa that is extending out front, and we can see that the first couple of rows of soldiers have their spears going forwards, and the back ones have them upwards. And this makes a solid block of spears, kind of like a hedgehog. As well as that, Philip had something called the heteroi, or the companion cavalry. And this is a group of very experienced soldiers on horseback who can move very rapidly. And between them and that solid phalanx, he had two very good tools that could use together. The heteroi for Alexander were made up of some of his close companions that he had gone to school with. Hephaestion, his friend stroke companion stroke lover. His friend Ptolemy, who would later become a pharaoh of Egypt, and his friend Cassander. As well as that, Philip introduced things like siege towers, battering rams, and oxyballus, a ballista, which is basically like a very, very big crossbow. So Alexander now has to deal with a number of uprisings. Thrace over here, but also various of the Hellenic states down here. So first of all, he goes to deal with those Hellenic states down to the south. To get there, he has to go past the city of Thessaly and their army. And they were located in the pass between two mountains. So they are basically sitting in there. And the idea for them was that they would be here and Alexander could not pass through there. Alexander was very big on surprise. And we're going to see this again and again. And what his strategy here was, is that they actually went over one of the mountains and approached them, the Thessalians, from behind. And the forces of Thessaly surrender and they join up with Alexander. So they've come from Macedonia down here, past Mount Ossa. Next, he takes them to the city of Thermopylae. And here, the city-states recognize him as the leader, and for now, they're going to calm down. The other cities, like Athens, submit to Alexander and he pardons them. So from Macedonia, they've come down to Thessaly. Thermopylae is down here, and we can see some of the other cities involved, like Thebes and Athens here. Alexander then travels to Corinth, and he takes the title of hegemon, which means leader of that group of states. There is a story there that he met with the famous philosopher Diogenes. So Diogenes was a philosopher who basically rejects wealth and a conventional life. He's going to live in poverty, a very simple life. He lived in a barrel, they said. One assumes a fairly large barrel, and he dressed in rags. He didn't want to wear expensive clothing or eat fancy foods. Now, the story is that when Alexander met with Diogenes, Alexander asks, "What can I do for you?" And Diogenes says, "Move over, you're blocking the light." And Alexander was laughed at this answer and went, "Oh, if I were not Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes." Basically, the idea that Diogenes was not sucking up to him and was not playing power games with him was very appealing. So from now, they have been to Corinth here, and they're forming a league of all of those states. Alexander has done this because he wants to unite all of those states into a powerful group so that then he can go and take over the Persian Empire. This is his long-term aim. But before he does this, he needs to make sure that Macedonia and all of the Hellenic states are securely under his control. So now he's going to go back up to Thrace and get them under control. He then has to go further north, where he goes up to the Triballi, who are located near the Danube River, and then he goes to the Danube and defeats a tribe there, the Getae. So the Danube is a major river going through Europe through to there. So from Macedonia, he's going up here. So Thrace was here. So he's been south. He's got all of the Greek areas under control. Now he is getting this area here under control. And next of all, he has to then go and deal with what's happening to the west, where Illyria and the Talanti are revolting. So he's been here, he's been south, he's been Thrace, he's been north. Now he has to go over here to Illyria, and this tribe here. And he defeats them, gets them under control. But before he can go off to conquer the Persian Empire, while he was busy dealing with all of those areas to the north and to the west, some of the Hellenic states are causing trouble again. In his absence, they have started to revolt again. And the two main cities involved were the big players of Thebes and Athens. Thebes decides to stand up against Alexander and his army. But Alexander comes in and defeats them, and he razes the city and divides it up between the neighbouring cities to reward them for their loyalty. When this has happened, Athens decides that discretion is the better part of valour and cedes to Alexander because they've seen what happens to Thebes when they try to stand up to him. So we have Thebes here and then Athens down here. So now all of this area here up to the north and to the west are under his control. So now Alexander's ready to take on Persia. But he knows that if he leaves Macedonia and the Hellenic states, there may be another uprising. So he needs somebody really reliable and loyal to stand in as his regent. And he picks an experienced general called Antipater, who had been a general under his father Philip. Now, Alexander's good friend Cassander was Antipater's son. And so Cassander was going to go with Alexander, and his father was going to stay behind and take care of Macedonia and the surrounding areas. So we're now at 334 BC, and Alexander is ready to take on the Persian Empire. Why? Well, at this point, the Persian Empire was huge. It's also referred to as the Achaemenid Empire, named after the first king. I'm going to call it the Persian Empire because I can say that. And for several hundred years, it had expanded and had become a highly organized empire. By 334 BC, the ruler was Darius III. And we can see here the full extent of the empire. It is going through the Middle East. It's got Egypt and part of Northern Africa. It's extending down towards India here. In the past, Thrace had been part of the empire for a few years. So Alexander over here in Macedonia sees this huge empire, its riches, its resources, and he wants it. This is just a little family tree showing the rulers of the Persian Empire, and it's too tiny to actually see anything useful there, but we have got Darius III is the emperor we're going to talk about. Now, because it was so large, the Persian Empire was highly organized. It was divided into areas referred to as a satrapy, and each of these was ruled by a satrap, a governor. And there were 4 capital cities because it was so large. There was a road system linking them all and a postal system. And here we can see a map with the major satraps, which we can see here. Now, the Persian Empire, to maintain control, had a very, very large army. And the most famous part of the army was referred to as the Immortals. It was 10,000 highly trained soldiers. So Alexander is about to take on the Persian Empire. And he does this by crossing over here at Hellespont, and he makes a statement. He throws his spear into the soil and says, "The gods are giving this to me. This is meant for me." And he has a very large army, he has foot soldiers, cavalry, and also a lot of ships, because his aim is to take all of this coastal region down here. So what we're going to look at next time is that series of battles as Alexander moves through the Persian Empire, taking as much of it as he can. As well, he starts to have a personal life because now he is the ruler, he is the king, and one of the jobs of the king is to make allegiances and hopefully eventually to have an heir. So that is what is coming next time.